She said it like it was just a joke, but something in her eyes asked me not to laugh. I was on my knees in the driveway, tightening the last bolt on the old vintage bike I'd been fixing up for weeks. The kind of job you do with your hands because your heart doesn't know what else to do. Sweat was slipping down the back of my neck, mixing with grease and dust. It was late afternoon, sky just starting to melt into amber. Quiet enough to hear the ticking of the cooling engine inside the garage, and the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard her. A voice, low and lazy, like it had nothing better to do than wander into my life. If I were younger. I looked up. There she was. Just standing on the sidewalk, sun behind her, casting this long, soft shadow across the pavement. She had a smile on her face, playful, almost careless, but her eyes were saying something else entirely. It wasn't the kind of look you give a stranger. It was the kind of look you give someone you've already imagined something with. She chuckled, flicked a piece of hair off her shoulder, and added with a wink. I'd ask for a ride. And then, she just kept walking. Like she hadn't just pressed a finger to a bruise I didn't know I had. Like she didn't feel the electricity crackle in the space between us. Like it wasn't the first time in a long time someone saw me and really saw me. And I just knelt there, my hand still holding the wrench, like some frozen snapshot of a man too afraid to admit what just happened. I told myself it didn't mean anything. She was just being nice. Just having fun. She probably talks to everyone like that. But my heart? It had already started to beat a little differently. You ever have a moment like that? Where something completely ordinary, a passing comment, a shared glance, suddenly feels heavy, like the beginning of a chapter you didn't even know you were writing? And you don't know why. But you can't stop turning the page. Yeah, that was mine. The thing is, you don't walk into those moments expecting them to change you. You just wake up one day with everything feeling different, and you can't quite explain how or why. But it starts here. With a woman I'd never spoken to before. Saying something that sounded like a joke. But hit me like a dare. Soft breath. Before we begin. If you've ever found yourself in a moment that changed everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a whisper curling around your ribs. Then welcome back. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. This is Passionate Tales Unfold. And this is how it started. The air smelled of pine and oil. My hands were greasy, my shirt damp with sweat. It was just another Saturday, until it wasn't. You know that time of day, just before sunset, when everything feels like it's holding its breath? That golden hour where the light softens and shadows start stretching long across the pavement. It was that kind of evening. Quiet. Familiar. Predictable. I'd been working on that old bike for weeks. Found it in a neighbor's trash pile, rusted chain, busted tires, the seat torn up like it had been through something. Just like me, I guess. Broken in places, but still holding together. I liked losing myself in the rhythm of fixing it. Something about the sound of the tools, the scent of rubber and metal, the way my hands knew what to do even when my head didn't. It gave me peace. Or at least something close to it. That street I lived on. It was the kind where nothing really happened. Same neighbors, same routines. Lawn mowers humming, sprinklers turning, kids on bikes circling the block in lazy loops. Nothing ever changed. And maybe that was the problem. Because somewhere deep down, I'd gotten used to being invisible. To being the man who nodded from a distance, who mowed his lawn, who waved out of politeness but didn't really talk to anyone anymore. Marriage does that to some people. Or maybe time does. You stop speaking. You start functioning. You become part of the background. That's where I was when she walked by. I'd seen her before. Just, never seen her. You know what I mean. She must have lived a few blocks over. Elegant, older, yeah, but not in a way that felt tired. In a way that felt, lived in. Like she knew how to move through the world with softness, but also steel. She wore this long, light wrap that floated behind her with every step. Floral, delicate, like it belonged in another decade. Her hair was up, a few loose strands catching the sunlight. And when she walked, it wasn't rushed. She wasn't going anywhere. She was just, existing. Like she owned the silence. And then she saw me. Her eyes flicked from the bike, to my hands, to my face. And she smiled. Not the kind you give out of courtesy. But the kind that feels like it knows something you don't. Then she said it. If I were younger. I froze. My fingers still gripping the wrench. My body suddenly aware of itself in a way it hadn't been in years. She let the words hang for a beat. Let them wrap themselves around the breeze. Then that chuckle, low, effortless, like she didn't mean anything by it. Like it was all a joke. I'd ask for a ride. And just like that, she was gone. Walked off like she hadn't lit a match and dropped it at my feet. I sat there in the driveway, grease on my knuckles, heart thudding harder than it should have. I told myself not to overthink it. She was probably just being friendly. Making conversation. But the truth? Something inside me had already shifted. It wasn't about the words. It was about the space they filled. About how long it had been since anyone, made me feel like a man instead of a piece of furniture. My wife. She barely looked at me anymore. We moved around each other like strangers sharing the same square footage. Meals in silence. Sleep on opposite edges of the bed. No fights. No drama. Just, nothing. And that woman. That one line. It reminded me that I was still there. Still someone. And once that door opened, even just a crack. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel it. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust either. It was, recognition. That gut-deep, bone-deep kind. The kind that whispers, you've been numb for a long time. And someone finally noticed. I wiped my hands on a rag, stared down the street where she disappeared, and felt something stir in my chest. Curiosity. Hunger. Maybe even guilt. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew something had started. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. It was 3 days later. I was out front, broom in hand, just sweeping leaves off the driveway. Not because it needed to be done, but because I needed something to do. Some way to keep still without sitting down. The bike leaned against the garage wall, clean now. Shining like it had something to prove. Like it wanted to be seen. I kept glancing up the street, even when I told myself I wasn't. Even when I tried pretending I wasn't hoping. And then, there she was. Same slow walk. Same lightness in her step, like gravity didn't weigh her down the same way it weighed the rest of us. She saw me. And this time, she stopped. Right at the edge of the driveway. Just far enough to be polite. Just close enough to pull me into her presence. Her eyes dropped to the bike. She nodded, approving. So, how's it run? I shrugged, brushing my palm down my shirt, suddenly aware of the dust, the sweat, the way my body felt clumsy under her gaze. It's good, I said. Smooth, surprisingly. For something that old. She smiled. Not a full one, just the corner of her mouth lifting like she knew something I didn't. Do you ever take it out past the ridge? That caught me. The ridge. About 5 miles out, uphill, winding roads, then that wide open stretch overlooking the valley. I hadn't been out there in years. I looked at her, and for a moment, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because something in the way she asked it felt layered. Like she wasn't just talking about the bike. She noticed my pause. Her voice dipped, softened, just a fraction. I used to love long rides, before everything got too heavy. Heavy. That word hit different. Like she'd just reached into my chest and named something I didn't know how to name. I should have just nodded. Said, "Have a good day." Swept the leaves, gone back inside. Pretended I hadn't heard what I thought I heard. But the silence between us felt like a doorway waiting to be opened. And I was tired of standing outside it. I glanced toward the bike. Then back to her. "You used to ride?" She nodded slowly. Eyes narrowing just slightly like she was remembering something far away. "A long time ago. Before life became schedules. Expectations. Laundry." She laughed gently, but it wasn't funny. It was hollow, like a truth wrapped in humor to make it easier to carry. "I used to go out there and feel like I could breathe. Just me and the road. Nothing pulling me back." I swallowed hard. My throat dry, even though the wind had cooled. It felt like we were talking about riding, but we weren't. We were talking about freedom. About escape. About that part of us that still wanted to feel something. "I haven't been out that way in years," I admitted. She tilted her head, studying me, not in a judgmental way. In a curious way. Like she was flipping through a book and finally found a page she'd been looking for. "You should." 2 words. Soft. Barely a suggestion. But they didn't land soft. They landed like heat in my chest. I looked at her hands. No rings. No tan lines. Just delicate fingers holding the strap of her bag, thumb brushing the edge in these small, distracted circles. Everything about her felt slow, intentional, present. Like she didn't rush through life anymore. Like she'd already done all the rushing and didn't get what she wanted out of it. She glanced toward the horizon, then back to me. "You never know what you'll find when you ride without a destination." And then, she smiled. Not a flirtatious smile. Not teasing. It was something else. An invitation. One that wasn't spoken out loud. But hung in the air like perfume. And for a moment, neither of us moved. The world around us kept going, cars passing, birds chirping, a distant lawn mower humming in the next yard. But between us, it was still. I nodded slowly. Not because I understood what was happening. But because something in me didn't want to let it pass. And as she turned to walk away again, same soft stride, same breeze catching the hem of her skirt, I felt something deeper than temptation. I felt seen. Not in a dramatic, storybook way. But in the quiet, aching way a man feels when he's been ignored for so long. That he almost forgot what it was like to matter. I watched her go. And the air felt different. Like something had been set in motion. And this time. I wasn't so sure I wanted to stop it. I didn't sleep well the night before. Not because I was nervous. Not exactly. It was more like, my body was wide awake, even in stillness. Like a part of me that had been asleep for years had just opened its eyes. All day, I moved through the motions, answered emails, folded laundry, made small talk with my wife about groceries and weekend plans. But everything felt off. Like the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was pretending it hadn't. I didn't tell her where I was going that evening. Didn't need to. I just said I was going for a ride. And she didn't ask. She barely looked up from her phone. I wish I could say that hurt. But it didn't. Because I'd stopped expecting anything from her a long time ago. The sun was sinking low when I pulled the second bike out from the garage. It had been sitting in the back, under a tarp. One I restored a few years ago, never rode it. Just kept it around like a memory I didn't want to let go of. Tires still good. Chain needed a quick oil. It felt right. Like it had been waiting for this moment, too. When I got to the edge of the ridge path, she was already there. Leaning against a wooden fence. Backlit by gold light filtering through the trees. The kind of light that makes everything look softer. More forgiving. She wore jeans and a loose linen blouse, off-white, maybe light blue, I couldn't tell in the fading light. Her sleeves rolled up. Hair loosely tied. A few strands fell over her cheek. And there was this, scent in the air. Light. Feminine. Something with jasmine maybe. It hit me before I even stepped off the bike. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't dressing up. She just was. And still, she stopped me in my tracks. "You brought two," she said, smiling as she looked at the bikes. "Figured I'd share," I replied, voice lower than usual. Felt like if I spoke too loud, I might break the spell. She ran her hand along the handlebar of the one I'd brought for her, fingers tracing the worn leather grip like it was something precious. Then she looked at me, eyes soft but alert. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I shrugged. "Just something I fixed up a while back." "No," she said, still looking at it. "You cared for it. That's different." And that hit me harder than I expected. Because I couldn't remember the last time someone noticed what I poured care into. Noticed the quiet parts of me. We started riding. The trail wound slowly through the trees, dappled in shadow and soft light. Birdsong in the distance. Leaves crunching under tires. The world narrowed to the two of us, pedaling quietly side by side. She didn't talk much at first. And I didn't need her to. There was something comforting in the silence between us. Like the kind of silence that comes after a long exhale. She moved like someone remembering who she used to be. The way her shoulders relaxed when the wind hit her. The way she stood on the pedals for that small hill, letting out a breathy laugh when she reached the top. The way she tilted her head to listen to the trees swaying overhead, like she hadn't heard that sound in years. And I watched like someone forgetting who he was supposed to be. Because who I was at home, the man who clocked in, came home, ate dinner in silence and lay beside a woman who no longer touched him. That version of me started to blur. And this version, the one who brought a second bike, who watched her from just behind her shoulder as her hair danced in the wind. This version felt more alive. More real. We reached the overlook just before dusk. That part of the ridge where the trees thin out and the valley spreads wide beneath you. The sky bleeding pink and violet, clouds turning soft at the edges. She stopped. Planted her feet. Took it all in. And I just stood beside her. No words. Just breath. Her arms crossed lightly over her chest. She leaned forward onto the fence railing, head tilted slightly. I glanced at her, stealing a moment I knew I wasn't supposed to want. And she must have felt it. Because she turned, slowly, eyes meeting mine. Not surprised. Not questioning. Just open. That kind of openness that doesn't ask permission, doesn't make demands. It just exists. Waiting. She spoke first. "I used to come here when I needed to remember who I was. Before." She didn't finish the sentence. And I didn't ask her to. Because I understood. I felt it. The weight she was talking about. That slow heaviness life puts on your chest, the expectations, the disappointments, the quiet nights filled with silence that scream louder than words. We were both carrying it. And for the first time, it didn't feel so lonely. We stood there for what felt like hours. Maybe it was minutes. I don't know. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I wasn't thinking about right or wrong. I wasn't even thinking about home. I was just there. With her. On that ridge. While the sun bled out over the sky. And the air between us tightened, like a string pulled too far, waiting to snap. And still, neither of us moved. Because something was happening. And we were both too aware to pretend it wasn't. That evening wasn't about lust. It wasn't about crossing a line. It was about arriving, in a place inside ourselves we hadn't visited in years. And something about that made everything else fade away. The wind changed. Just a little, enough to lift her hair off her shoulder and send it drifting sideways in the golden light. She didn't brush it away. Just let it move like the breeze knew something we didn't. I stood beside her. One foot on the pedal, the other planted in dirt. Hands resting on the handlebars. Trying to stay still, and failing. Because something was shifting. Not just between us, but within me. There's this point you reach when a moment stops being simple. Stops being innocent. It's not physical. It's not about where your hands are. It's where your mind goes. When it finally lets itself go there. 2 hikers passed behind us, mid-30s maybe, a couple. They weren't loud. Just close enough to feel their presence move through our space like a gust of wind. I heard their steps on the gravel. Then silence as they caught sight of us. I didn't look at them. But I felt them look. And maybe that's what did it. That reminder that the world still existed, that other people could see us. Not doing anything wrong. But not doing nothing either. She shifted, barely. Her elbow moved inward. Her body leaned, just enough that her hand came to rest on the wide, flat rock between us. Fingers not touching mine. But close. Too close to ignore. Too close to pretend this was still just a casual moment between neighbors. Her eyes stayed on the view, but her presence, God, it was all around me. The scent of her perfume. The quiet, rhythmic sound of her breath. The warmth radiating from her skin, even in the fading chill of dusk. Then, softly, she said it. My husband used to bring me here. She paused. Just long enough for the ache to surface in her voice. Back when he remembered I existed. And there it was. The sentence that cracked something open. She didn't cry. She didn't choke up. She said it like a fact. Like she'd said it before, maybe to herself, maybe into a pillow late at night when the space beside her in bed stayed cold for too long. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because anything I said would have felt small compared to the weight of what she'd just shared. I turned my head slowly, eyes tracing her profile. The soft slope of her cheek. The slight furrow in her brow. The way her lips pressed together, not tight, just, held. Held like a woman trying to keep herself from unraveling completely. The wind rustled the trees behind us. Leaves whispered across the ground like they didn't want to interrupt. And somewhere far off, a bird called once, then went quiet. She kept staring ahead, but I knew, she felt my eyes on her. And I knew she wasn't pulling away. It was in that silence that the question slipped in. Not spoken. Not even fully formed. Just there, between the space of our breaths. Was this still just a ride? Or had we already crossed into something else? Not in action. But in intention. Because somewhere in that silence, I stopped being just a man showing someone a trail. And she stopped being just a woman trying to remember what freedom felt like. We became 2 people who no longer knew how to go back to what we were before this moment. She finally turned to me. Slowly. Like she was afraid any sudden movement might make everything too real too fast. And in her eyes, God, there was so much. Not desire. Not yet. But permission. Permission to see her. To hold her gaze. To know her. And when she looked at me like that, I didn't feel like a stranger. I didn't feel like a husband betraying something. I felt like a man being invited into a truth no one else had asked to hear. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there. Two souls hovering in a space that wasn't quite past temptation. But wasn't innocent anymore either. And somehow, that silence said more than anything words could. It said I see you. It said I remember what it's like to be wanted. It said I'm here, if you need a place to fall for a while. She looked away again. But her hand didn't move. And mine didn't either. The hikers had long since disappeared down the path. And we were alone again. Only now. Alone didn't feel empty. It felt heavy. With all the things neither of us had said. And all the things we already knew. We didn't speak on the way back. Not because there was nothing to say. But because the words had shifted. Anything either of us said now would have echoed too loudly in the air between us. The ride down the trail felt slower than the way up. Or maybe I was just more aware of everything. The way her shoulders moved with each turn. The rhythm of her breath as it floated back toward me. The delicate curve of her spine in the fading light. It had cooled slightly. That soft, post-sunset chill that wraps around you like a whisper. And every time the wind cut through the trees, I wondered if she felt it too, or if the warmth between us had already begun to rise. We hit the bend near the creek, a curve I knew well. Roots jutted out from the path, just enough to catch a tire if you weren't careful. And she wasn't. Not because she didn't see them, but because she was looking back, smiling. At me. That half-laugh smile, the kind you give someone when you know something just passed between you that can't be taken back. Her front tire caught, and her foot slipped off the pedal. She didn't fall. But she tipped, suddenly, sharply. And before I even had time to think, I was off my bike, hand catching her waist, pulling her steady. It wasn't dramatic. No big rescue. No arms flailing. Just a quiet moment of stillness as my hand settled against her. Right there, warm and alive, just above her hip. Her hand reached for my shoulder instinctively, fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt, steadying herself. But once the danger passed, once we both realized she was fine. Neither of us let go. She looked up at me, lips parted, breath shallow. And for the first time all night, I heard it. Her breath trembling. Not from the stumble. But from the closeness. I held her just a second longer than I needed to. Just long enough to feel the way her chest lifted with each inhale. The way her skin felt beneath that thin linen blouse, soft, and warmer than the night around us. She didn't pull away. Not even an inch. Then she laughed, soft, nervous. But it wasn't about the stumble anymore. It was the laugh of someone who just realized they were standing at the edge of something dangerous, and wanted to see what it felt like to look down. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. Instead, she looked past me, toward the trees, the sky, the path behind us. Like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. Then her voice dropped. Low. Unsteady. Almost playful, but with an ache wrapped inside it. You can still leave. Just those 4 words. Not a tease. Not a dare. A truth. An offering. A door left slightly ajar in case I needed to walk away before it was too late. And I should have. I should have said something, anything, to release us both from that moment. But I didn't. I just stood there, still holding her. Still letting her hold me. Because even though her body was still, her breath hadn't settled. And neither had mine. I wasn't sure if what I felt in my chest was fear. Or want. Maybe both. Maybe that's what made it so dangerous. I let my hand slide away slowly, deliberately. Not jerking back like I was ashamed. Not clinging like I was desperate. Just, letting go in a way that still held on to something. She didn't move. And when her eyes finally met mine again, God, I'll never forget that look. There was no seduction in it. No smirk. No calculation. Just this quiet ache. Like she'd been waiting years for someone to notice her enough to see past the surface. And now that it had happened, she didn't know whether to run or stay. That night wasn't about a kiss. It wasn't about hands and skin and heat. It was about permission. To feel. To be seen. To let someone in, just a little, before the walls could go back up. I remember thinking. If I walk away now, I can still tell myself this was nothing. But if I stay, even for one more moment, it becomes something I'll never forget. And I stayed. Not because I was weak. Not because I didn't love my wife. But because in that second, I needed to remember that I was still capable of being wanted. Still capable of reaching for someone. And being met halfway. And that mattered. Maybe more than it should have. Maybe more than I was ready to admit. She didn't ask me to walk her the rest of the way home. But when we got back to the start of the trail, she waited. And when I loaded her bike into the back of her car, our hands brushed once more. Just a moment. But I felt it. The pause. The hesitation. The pull. And again, no one said a word. Because something had already been said. In silence. In breath. In the way neither of us pulled away when we still could have. And in the way we both knew. We wouldn't forget what had just happened. No matter how hard we tried. We didn't say much on the drive back. She turned the music low, something instrumental, something I couldn't name. The kind of song that fills the air but doesn't demand attention. Just, makes room for whatever you're afraid to feel. I sat beside her, hands in my lap, trying not to think about how close we'd come to something. Trying not to look at her lips when she wasn't speaking. Trying not to remember how they parted when she said, "You can still leave." When we pulled into her driveway, the porch light was off. The house was quiet, like it had been waiting for her return. She parked but didn't open the door right away. Just rested her fingers on the steering wheel like they were suddenly too tired to move. I looked over at her, but she kept her eyes forward. Her chest rose and fell once, slowly. Then she turned to me, soft smile. "Come on. I'll show you the rest of the garden." I hesitated, God, I hesitated. Because I knew exactly what it meant to walk with her to that porch. I knew what kind of stories start with harmless tours and half-lit homes and quiet backyards. But I followed. Of course, I followed. Because there was a part of me that had already crossed a line before I ever stepped out of that car. The gravel crunched under our feet. The crickets had started up, soft at first, then louder as we moved through the yard. It smelled like cut grass and earth and faint traces of her perfume that hadn't faded from the trail. She didn't lead fast. She walked like she wanted me to watch her, but wasn't sure if she wanted me to see her. And I did. More than I should have. When we reached the porch, the light above the door flickered on, motion sensor. That warm yellow glow that makes everything feel slower. She turned to face me, her foot on the top step. One hand on the rail, the other resting loosely against her side. For a second, we just stood there, me at the bottom, her at the top. She looked down at me like I'd surprised her. Like this was a moment she hadn't fully planned for, but also couldn't pull away from. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You fixed your bike beautifully." And that did something to me. Not because of the compliment. But because of the way she said it. Like she wasn't talking about the bike at all. Like she was talking about me. About how I'd held her. About how I hadn't let go too soon. I wanted to say something back, anything. But I didn't trust my voice to hold steady. So I just stepped one stair higher. And then another. When I reached the top, we were eye level. And there, right there in the space between us, was that silence again. But this one felt different. Not like a warning. Like a permission. She leaned in. Slowly. Carefully. Our foreheads didn't touch. Our bodies didn't press. But her lips, barely, met mine. A soft kiss. No hunger. No urgency. Just enough to make the air feel heavier. Just enough to make my knees feel like they'd betray me if I moved too fast. She pulled back first. Not far, just enough to look at me again. And before I could speak, she reached down, brushed her fingers against the inside of my wrist. A small touch. Like a question. Like a thread being pulled. And then she stepped back inside. But the door, it didn't close all the way. It stayed slightly ajar. Like maybe she wasn't ready to end it yet. Like maybe she wanted me to decide what happened next. I stood there. Frozen. Hands still tingling from where she'd touched me. Lips still buzzing from the feel of hers. Heart doing this strange, uneven rhythm like it didn't know whether to speed up or shut down entirely. I looked at that crack in the doorway. Just a few inches. But it felt like a canyon. One step forward, and I was someone else. One step back, and I could pretend this never happened. But I didn't move. Not forward. Not back. I just stood there, breathing in everything we hadn't said. Everything we'd allowed in that single moment. My throat tightened. Not from guilt. Not yet. But from the ache of knowing something had just started. And I didn't know how to stop it. Or if I even wanted to. Behind me, the night moved on. The trees swayed gently. The crickets kept singing. And inside that house, she was waiting. Maybe not for me. Maybe just for herself. But she'd left that door open. And part of me, a part one hadn't touched in years, wanted to walk through it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not in the way sleep usually happens. It was more like drifting in and out. Between the sound of her voice, the weight of her breath against my chest, and the ghost of that kiss playing over and over in the space behind my eyes. She was in my dreams. But not like a fantasy. She was light. She was warmth through the window. She was the smell of lavender and dust on old pages. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself. It just fills the corners of a quiet room. I woke before the sun. The sky still bruised, the street still sleeping. The world hadn't caught up yet. And I couldn't stay in the house. So I rode. Nowhere in particular, just out. Let the wind press against my chest. Let the road distract my thoughts. But even the wind felt different that morning. Like it wasn't pushing back. Like it was guiding me, gently, towards something I couldn't name. There was a stillness in the air. Not empty. Just, listening. I rode for a while, letting the sun rise over my shoulders. It was quiet. Peaceful. And then I saw it. Tied loosely to the handlebar of the second bike. The one I'd left leaning against the garage. Was her scarf. Soft. Pale. Faintly floral. Still carrying the scent of her neck. No note. No message. Just that. Just, her. I didn't know how she'd left it there. Didn't hear a car. Didn't hear footsteps. But somehow, I didn't need an explanation. It didn't feel like a gesture. It felt like a whisper. Like a promise folded into fabric. Like a way of saying, I haven't walked away. The day passed in that strange half-light. Everything moved around me, but nothing touched me. I answered phone calls. Smiled at my wife like I meant it. Played with my son in the backyard. Nodded at the neighbors as they walked their dogs. And yet, I was somewhere else. Somewhere softer. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere that smelled like her scarf and sounded like that sentence she left me with. You can still leave. That evening, I found myself back near her place. Not planning. Not scheming. Just, moving. And there she was. In the garden behind her house. Not dressed up. Not waiting in some dramatic pose. Just sitting. Knees drawn close. Arms resting on them. Eyes watching the last light sink behind the treetops. I didn't call out. Didn't wave. Didn't ask why. I just walked toward her. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. But she moved over, just slightly. Made room on the bench beside her. I sat. We didn't speak for a long time. Not because there was nothing to say. But because the silence was saying everything. The cicadas hummed around us. The twilight settled like a blanket. And the garden smelled of something green, and wet, and alive. Finally, she said it. So soft I almost didn't catch it. Sometimes we don't want to be rescued. She looked ahead. Not at me. Just remembered. That line, God. It hit something in me I didn't know I was still protecting. Because I think that's what this whole thing was. Not some wild affair. Not lust. But two people. Just trying not to disappear. Two people. Trying to feel real again. Even for a moment. We didn't touch. Our shoulders didn't brush. Our hands didn't reach. Not this time. But our knees sat close enough to feel the warmth of each other. And somehow. That felt more intimate than anything else. I looked over at her, and for the first time, I didn't see someone I wanted. I saw someone I recognized. Like a mirror held up to a version of me I'd buried a long time ago. Someone tired. Someone aching to be seen. Someone who needed more than fixing, they needed remembering. I didn't know what this was. I still don't. But I knew it wasn't nothing. And that scared me more than anything. Because if it wasn't nothing, then it meant something. And if it meant something, then something inside me had already changed. Something I couldn't take back. We sat there until the stars came out. Still. Quiet. Two people sharing a silence that didn't need explanation. A silence that didn't ask for more. A silence that held us both. Exactly where we were. Days passed. I stayed away from her street. I didn't take the bike out. Not once. Not because I was afraid of seeing her again. But because everything felt like a shadow of her. Every breeze reminded me of the scent on that scarf. Every quiet moment echoed with her voice. That fragile, hesitant invitation. I tried to bury it. Tried to push it down deep where it couldn't breathe. But it wasn't just memory or longing. It was something else. Something that had opened a door inside me. A door I didn't know I'd left unlocked. And then, one afternoon, I saw her. Not alone. She was at the cafe down the road. Sitting across from a man I knew was her husband. They were quiet, sipping coffee, sharing smiles that felt practiced and warm. Our eyes met across the room. There was no fire. No desperation. No plea. Just a soft, distant smile. Like a secret shared in silence. Like an apology without words. Like an acknowledgement of something we both carried now. But could never say out loud. I nodded slightly. She returned it with the faintest lift of her chin. And that was it. No explanations. No promises. No regrets. Just two people. Who knew that some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. Walking away from that cafe. I realized something. Not every ride is meant to last. Some are just a moment, a breath of wind through the trees. But those moments, they leave a mark. They leave you tracing the trail long after it's gone. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's enough to remember what it feels like to be seen. To be held, if only for a moment. To be reminded that beneath the surface, there's still a part of you alive. I don't know where that road will lead. I don't know what comes next. But I carry that night with me, the light, the warmth, the unspoken truth. And sometimes, when the wind catches my breath just right, I can almost hear her voice again. Soft. Faint. Unforgettable. Before we close this chapter, if you've ever felt caught between what you want and what you should do, between silence and confession, between staying and leaving, what would you have done? If it were you on that bike? If you felt the pull of something fragile and real? Something that didn't come with promises or guarantees. Just a whisper of what might have been. Sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that echo the longest. The ones that linger in the spaces between words. Between decisions. Between who we are and who we want to be. Was it longing? Or was it love? Maybe it was both. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something we don't have the words for yet. Tell me what you think. I read every word. You're not alone. Here, in this space, we keep unfolding together. Right here on Passionate Tales Unfold.